In the bleak stillness of the snow-bleached countryside, they peered through the Range Rover's frosted windows. It was the morning of December 7th when bricklayer Ken Jiggins and turkey farmer Peter Fearbold trampled through the snow to feed pheasants kept on a farm in Rettedon, South Essex. When they reached a padlocked gate that led to a fishing lake beyond, they were surprised to find a Range Rover parked in front of it. Inside, they could make out the figures of 3 men sitting slumped in their seats. "They look so peaceful, we thought they were asleep," Fearbold later remarked. But they were dead. In one of the most astonishing multiple murders to have taken place in this country, Tony Tucker, Pat Tate and Craig Rolfe had been shot dead at point-blank range. On the gate was a notice with the message, "Countryside Premium Scheme. Farming operations must still take place, so please take special care to avoid injury. The use of guns or any other activity which disturbs people or wildlife are not allowed on this land. Enjoy your visit." The hitman did not pay the sign much heed. He'd carried out the triple execution with chilling accuracy. Rolfe, the driver, was killed first with a single shot to the back of his head. His foot was on the brake pedal and his hands were still on the steering wheel, as if he'd stopped at traffic lights. Then came Tucker, almost blasted with a single shot to the back of the head. He was still holding a mobile phone. Only Tate in the back seat showed any signs that he'd tried to move. He'd taken a bullet to the stomach, police believed, to immobilise him before he was shot in the head. This was no ordinary murder, but bore the hallmarks of a carefully planned, cold-blooded assassination that brought to the end the criminal careers of 3 notorious underworld figures. Led by Tucker, who ran a security firm, their gang controlled the drugs trade in a large number of clubs across Essex and South London. The victims had cut a brutal swathe through the local scene, building an unenviable reputation and heaping huge rewards from extortion, murder, drug dealing, intimidation and plain thuggery. A team of 15 police officers has spent months poring over the evidence, so far to little avail. "It is a classic detective case," said Detective Superintendent Ivan Dibley, the officer who took charge of the case. "There is no shortage of suspects because they are known criminals and all are associates of known criminals. Normally, with a murder inquiry, once you've got a suspect, you're home and dry. With this case, our problem is also determining who is the real suspect." The Range Rover was hoisted away with the dead men still inside and virtually taken apart by the police. But it was found to contain no substantial clues, no fingerprints, and no solid forensic evidence. All the pointers that whoever took them to their deaths is likely to have been a close and trusted associate. Ray, not his real name, a former associate of Tucker, said, "They were found with no weapons on them, which is unbelievable for those 3. There's no reason on the planet to go down that track. If they wanted to have a meet, as the police have suggested, they would have done it at one of their places or at a club. All their deals were done by their minions in garage services. They weren't stupid. They were under surveillance quite regularly." Dibley confirms that when the police searched the dead men's houses after the murders, a gun was found secreted in Tate's. The real mystery isn't that someone hated these notorious figures enough to have had them killed, but that the killer was able to lead them, unarmed and unsuspecting, down a country lane, like lambs to the slaughter. Even to begin to unravel Detective Superintendent Dibley's classic case, you have to appreciate just how these 3 men rose to such criminal prominence. They can be linked to the ecstasy-related death of Leah Betts, as well as a host of cases of murder, torture and extortion. Tucker, Tate and Rolfe lived and acted like latter-day craze. But their patch, rather than being confined to the old criminal heartland of East End, extended across South Essex. Essex at first seems like an unlikely location for vicious gangland retribution. Dibley's office is no rundown inner city nick. The brand new South Woodham Ferris police station comes complete with surveillance cameras, electronic entry systems and pristine no smoking offices. As you drive through the town's deserted streets on a Sunday morning, it feels as if you're in a real version of Legoland, where neat, modern terrace houses meet the main drag in perfect crescents and cul-de-sacs. Like Basildon, South Waltham Ferris is an overspilled town designed to be a working-class paradise. But what the social engineers apparently failed to consider was that as the habitats poured out the slums of the East End, they would take their criminals with them. No amount of architectural planning can obliterate the bleak lowlands that the towns were built on. The desolation of the crowded East End slums and a life of no prospects has been replaced by the desolation of row upon row of modern houses with no pubs, no community and no prospects. Dance halls, skiffle music and beer have been replaced by nightclubs, techno and drugs, and the crazed Essex descendants have adjusted their operations accordingly. Although Tony Tucker's firm dabbled in the traditional protection rackets, it was the 90s ecstasy boom which suddenly gave it to the potential to earn huge money. At the tail end of the 80s, Tucker was building up a security business which saw him running doors from Raquel's, where the ecstasy that Leah Betts took was obtained from an unknown dealer, to Club UK in Wandsworth, South London. At that time, Tucker was still a small-time businessman with criminal leanings. He lived in a 2-bedroom house, drove a second-hand Granada, and his main vice was taking a bit of door money on the side. As ecstasy moved out of the underground rave culture and into mainstream clubland, having control of the club security often meant having control of the drugs that went in and out. Dealers were prepared to pay substantial tithes for the exclusive right to carry out their legal operations inside the clubs and without harassment. Although he didn't sell drugs himself, Tucker became a fulcrum for deals between large drug firms. By 1992, he was considered big time and had a fearsome reputation and a high-profile career as boxer Nigel Benn's minder. But Tucker's personal drug of choice was not the love drug. He had always been a bodybuilder, and as the money rolled in, he started injecting a cocktail of the steroid Nubane and cocaine. At the same time, along with Tate and Rolfe, he instigated the regime of intimidation and violence that would eventually lead to his downfall. He believed he was invincible, says Ray. He was really just a stockbroker, passing gear on, but he started getting nasty. Ray tells of one of Tucker's early rip-offs. In keeping with his image as someone who had made it, he kept horses stabled near Basildon. He discovered that the owner was in debt and made discreet inquiries to find out exactly to whom he owed money. Armed with this information, Tucker sent a group of heavies into the stable owner's riding school bar. His henchmen smashed the place to pieces with iron rods. While they were at it, they attacked the barmaid. The next day, Tucker went to the owner and said that he'd heard about his trouble and that he knew who was behind it. He told them that if he could stable his horses there for free, he would ensure that there was no more violence. Tucker was starting to live and act as if he was the Essex equivalent of a mafia don. One Sunday morning, the peace of the sleepy village of Chafford Hundred was disturbed by the thud of high-volume dance music coming from his house in Diamond Close. Parked outside was his new jet-black, top-of-the-range Porsche, bearing the number plate TT9. Inside, Tucker was holding court with a few friends while he lay in bed with his common-law wife, Anna. In an obvious display of new money, he had hired a professional DJ to set up twin decks at the foot of the bed and spin tunes solely for his benefit. The bedroom was liberally decorated with pictures of Tucker and his celebrity friend Nigel Benn. Tucker wanted everyone to know that he was the king of his sprawling South Essex manor, but his flamboyant display of criminal wealth was destined to be short-lived. A year later, Tucker had acquired enough money to buy a £250,000 luxury house in the village of Fobbin. 2 months after he moved in, he was dead. There is a certain sad inevitability about Craig's life of crime. His father ran market stalls in Basildon, and in the year of Rolfe's birth, his mother Lorraine was having an affair with another man, John Kennedy. On Christmas Eve 1968, Kennedy beat Rolfe's father to death with a £3 skittle. Kennedy was arrested and charged with murder, and Lorraine was subsequently charged with making false statements to cover up for him. She was sentenced to 18 months. Craig Rolfe was born in Holloway Prison in 1969. Rolfe's role in Tucker's firm is generally accepted as a minor. He was basically a gopher for Tucker, says Dibley. He did a bit of driving, a few errands, whatever. He had a very serious cocaine habit of his own. It was in his interest just to tag along with Tucker. But Rolfe was probably Tucker's most trusted friend, and he was certainly implicated in some of Tucker's most dubious scams. In September 1995, the pair were approached by a part-time drug dealer who had acquired £18,000 worth of cannabis to sell. Tucker told the dealer he would sort something out. The three travelled to Birmingham, where Tucker claimed to have a contact. When the dealer and Rolfe waited, Tucker disappeared with the drugs. He returned saying the police had busted them before he got the money. The dealer had to accept the excuse or take them on. There is no police record of a bust in the city at this time. Tucker's other partner in crime, Pat Tate, was a man who liked to throw his weight around. They were all physically big men, confirms Dibley. But Tate, if he walked through a door, he would have filled it. I don't think I've ever seen such a huge man. It was a combination of temper and bravado that brought him to Tucker's attention. In 1989, after Heavy's weekend clubbing, Tate got into an argument about his bill at the Basildon Happy Eater. He attacked the cashier and took the money from the till. He was arrested, but while awaiting trial at Bellericay Magistrates Court, he assaulted the police officer left to guard him, escaped through the window and disappeared on the back of a motorbike. He holed up for a while in Spain. It was only when he made the mistake of crossing the border to Gibraltar that he was rearrested and sent back to receive a prison sentence in Britain. Tucker had a habit, according to Ray, of befriending likely allies when they were released from prison. Before his incarceration, Tate knew Tucker and Rolfe only vaguely. After his release in 1993, the three were inseparable. You'd never see one without one of the other two, recalls Ray. Tate quickly graduated from someone who was just a thug to a real villain. He had previously been a second-hand car dealer, but with Tucker, he'd willingly let himself get involved in activities that would nearly cost him his life long before he was shot to death in the Range Rover. In 1994, a small-time criminal, Steve Nipper Ellis, was said to have crossed the three big men. Tucker had a mistress called Donna, who had allegedly asked Ellis if he knew where Tucker might be found. In jest, Ellis replied that Tucker was probably giving his old lady one up the... The remark was phoned straight through to Tucker by his girlfriend. Tucker immediately took Rolfe and Tate down to Ellis's house. Although Nipper wasn't there, his sister was. The three men threatened to break her fingers, and in a sense Ellis alleged went to have it out with them. He found only Tucker and Rolfe. When Ellis pulled a gun on them, they fled. Still boiling with rage, Ellis was then said to have gone to Tate's house and thrown a brick through the bathroom window. As Tate leaned out to see what was going on, Ellis allegedly unleashed a volley of gunfire, shooting Tate in his upper arm as he raised his hands in front of his face. Whilst Tate was hospitalised, Tucker and Rolfe went on a rampage. They wrecked Ellis's house and took his car and other possessions. Ellis went on the run. Although he wanted to negotiate a settlement, Tucker insisted that he had to pay for the price for shooting Tate. The latter was in Basildon Hospital, where Tucker and Rolfe smuggled him drugs. Fearing that Ellis might come to the hospital to finish him off, they also smuggled him in a gun, which police discovered after a tip-off. When he was recovered, Tate was sent to Whitehall prison for possessing the firearm. Ellis was arrested after the attempted murder, but was only found guilty of illegally possessing firearms. He served 7.5 months. On his release, Ellis fled to the West Country. When I was in jail, I had numerous death threats, he claimed to The Sun. On one occasion, 2 men come up to me and told me that a 10 grand contract had been put out on me. As soon as I got out of prison, I was ordered to leave town. I was told that if I ignored the warnings, they would retaliate, A hitman went to my dad's door looking for me. My family told me that Tate and Tucker planned to snatch my little sister and take her fingers off one by one. She was only 15. She was terrified. The threats never stopped. But Tucker and Tate were too busy building their own empire to spend much time tracking down Ellis. In November 1994, whilst Tate was still in hospital, it is claimed by Tate's mother Maria they murdered a local drug dealer, Kevin Whitaker. Kevin was acting as a courier, taking £60,000 worth of cannabis to another drugs gang in Romford. But he didn't bring back the money. No one knows the reason why, but it is thought that he could have been ripped off, in much the same way as Tucker conned the dealer in Birmingham. He knew that he would have to pay them back, but it is rumoured that he was willing to go to the police to protect himself. According to Maria Tate, on November 17th, Tucker and Rolfe tracked Whitaker down and took him to Dunton, Basildon, a bleak area with a housing estate and a ring road opposite Ford's testing track, where they forced him to the ground. As he pleaded for mercy, they pulled down his trousers and injected him in the groin with a lethal concoction of drugs, including Special K, the street name for ketamine, a drug used to numb horses before castration. The coroner also found quantities of lignocaine in Whitaker's body, an aesthetic drug used as a cutting agent for cocaine. After the murder, the pair are said to have boasted about their accomplishment to Tate. Maria claims her son blurted out the story from his hospital bed while on drugs smuggled in by his friends. Rolfe was called to give evidence at the inquest, and it was later discovered that Whitaker had telephoned him 4 times on the day of his death. A message asking him to contact Rolfe was also logged on his radio pager. Rolfe was known to be a close associate of Whitaker, a friend, if you like, says Dibley, who was not himself involved in the case. I think he was known to be one of the last people to have actually seen him alive. Well, if Mrs. Tate is to be believed, clearly it would have been the last people to see him alive because he would have been instrumental in his death. As I understand it, Rolfe was not exactly forthcoming with his total involvement, which is not surprising. But we've got a sort of sanitised version of why he last saw Whitaker. But there was no hard evidence for which to charge Tucker or Rolfe, and the 2 men continued to dominate the club and drug scene in South Essex. In 1995, it was business as usual. Tucker moved into a new home, Brymount Lodge, which came complete with electric gates and stables. Rolfe moved into Tucker's old house. In October 1995, the police staged a televised raid on Club UK in Wandsworth. In order to escape arrest, a dealer dropped 800 pills on the floor. Tucker and Rolfe showed precious little sympathy for the dealer's plight. When he pleaded that he could not pay them their usual cut, they went round to his house and put a bow knife to his throat. They told him that every week he owed them money. They put another £500 on top. Just for good measure, they stole his TV and his stereo. When Tate came out of prison in October, he was keen to establish his presence. The week he was released, he wrote off Tucker's Porsche after taking a mixture of Special K and cocaine. Rolfe bought the Range Rover, and the trio continued to intimidate all comers. They thought they were indestructible, recalls Ray. They got a lust for violence, and they wanted everyone to know that they were back together again. In November 1995, Leah Betts, the daughter of a policeman, slipped into a coma after collapsing at her home in Latcherton near Basildon during her 18th birthday party. Her parents' bedside vigil and her subsequent death led to national outrage over the easy availability of ecstasy. Under intense public pressure to get an arrest, the police were starting to put heat on Tucker and his firm, arresting several of his associates. The Essex drug underworld was rife with paranoia about who was talking and what the police were going to do next. The pressure cooker atmosphere only served to stoke Tate's rabid behaviour. 2 nights before he died, Tate hospitalised Roger Ryan, the manager of a Basildon pizza company. He had asked for toppings for which the London pizza company did not offer on its menu. Tate swore down the telephone at Ryan and arrived at Basildon half an hour later. He threw a till across the room, punched Ryan in the face and smashed his head down on a glass plate on the draining board. Then he warned him not to call the police or he would return and smash the shop up and the staff. Ryle opted not to press charges. Detective Superintendent Dibley has now retired, but he remains convinced that it was Tate's behaviour which led to the Range Rover deaths. There are a number of reasons why that may be the case. He just may have got out of control through drugs, and he was upsetting the apple cart of what was a fairly slick operation. It might be because he was mouthy and violent that others were afraid that he might bring attention to himself and themselves because of his general behaviour, so they decided to take him out of the scene. But with Tate either in prison or hospital for much of the time that the firm was on the ascent, Tucker and Rolfe could equally have provided countless motives for all three being killed. Ellis is still in hiding, and the Club UK dealer they threatened has disappeared to Spain. Either he and his associates would have a motive for the killing. So too would the rival drugs firms to which Whitaker was affiliated. An alternative theory involves a huge assignment of cannabis with an estimated value of $2 million that was discovered by a farmer floating in a lake approximately 6 miles away from Rotterdam in October 1995. Police believe it was dropped from a light aircraft but for the farmer's intervention would have been picked up by a local gang. It has been suggested that Tucker, Rolfe and Tate were told of a second drop in another lake, and it was what persuaded them to drive down the lane when they met their deaths. Dibley also said, "Word is going around that the associates of Tucker are watching with interest to see if the police make any arrests. If we fail, then they will seek their own retribution. All of the general public won't lose one moment's sleep because these people were taken away. There are people close to them who are capable of seeking retribution, if for no other reason than to avenge the death of a friend. But also, I suspect to make sure that they're not next. Because if the guy who's done this is prepared to shoot 3 of his close mates, anyone else who's close to him might be at risk." With ecstasy being bought from around £2 a tablet and then sold in clubs for £12 to $15, there are huge profits to be made. And, as the Range Rover murders have been demonstrated, there are people prepared to go to any lengths to protect their profits. Not only that, there are a number of pretenders who idolise Tucker and Rolfe and aspire to take their place. "What you've got to understand is the paranoia that is everywhere in their world," says Ray. "People are continuously being ripped off and there are constant death threats. These firms want to make sure that they're not next. And you've got these kids coming up who want to make a name for themselves. They're prepared to shoot someone for nothing." Through contacts in Whitmore Prison, where Tate was an inmate, legendary gangster Reggie Cray had expressed an interest in linking up with Tucker on a vending machine operation. "You're joking," was Tucker's dismissive response. "He's a has-been." In his short criminal life, Tucker never achieved the national prominence of the Crays. But the legacy of Tucker's death and Pat and Craig threatened to be with us for a long time to come.